and welcome back to our Falchion build for Skallagrim, the Falchion.
No, it's Skallagrim.
I thought it was the Falchion.
No, Skallagrim is way better.
Alright, whatever. You guys, this sword is a build for you and for Skallagrim himself, so you guys pick the name. Tell us which one you like the most in the comments.
It's Skallagrim.
I think it's Falchion.
It's 100% Skallagrim. It has a double meaning to it. It's a single-edged blade, but with a guard. It's Skallagrim.
Either way, we got a lot of work to make the guard happen. To recap, where we left off with the guard was just in the rough forging. It's pretty bulky, but all the geometry's there. So we have to move to a grinder and start removing a lot of material. Do a lot of it on the rough grinder, polish it through the grits, and then we'll do a lot of tricky detail grinding on it afterwards. And we also have to make the rings happen.
Yeah, well, that's easy. Because I use the forging die to preform the rings. All I have to do is follow the stuff that's already in the forging. I left the webbing around the center block, so I'll have to cut that out a little bit. And then I'll move on to the finer work, either on the narrow wheel or by the file.
Cool. And one thing that we have learned when we were working from the really low-res photo, probably from the early 1900s of this sword.
Garbage photo.
Garbage photo. We thought it would have two rings because more often than not, if you see a ring on one side of the guard, it's usually another one on the other side. So we decided initially to make two rings to go on either side. Since then, we've gotten a better photo, and it looks like that sword probably only has one ring. But we're already going to make some artistic changes to this sword.
Yeah, in reality, I recommend a sword that is symmetrical on both sides.
Right.
Even with rapiers that have a lot of mass here, that will have a sweep on the other side.
Yeah.
And that is because, especially if you're cutting, not so much with thrusting, but with cutting, it matters if your guard tries to lead you to one side or another.
Flop and...
Yeah, you don't want, especially a slicing blade that is so nice and flat, a cutter, you don't want it to try to flop. You want a performance piece.
And you're looking at me a lot. I feel like you're teaching me. You should be teaching them.
Well,
I have a lot to learn, right?
Correct. But my case still stands. What happens is you have a blade, right? And what you want is the maximum symmetry between this side and this side. Now, if you have too much mass here, you will try to follow like that.
Yeah.
And that's how you get suboptimal cuts on your tatami mats, or you will be able to perform much worse with it in a duel, for example.
Right, and one of our main purposes of making the sword for Skallagrim is not only to, honor the guy that's been doing a lot of awesome work in the sword industry for a long time, reviews and whatnot, but we want to put it in his hands and see how he feels about the performance of the sword. So we're going to make a few changes. Let's get started.
Indeed, but one short point that we failed to address up to now is that it is not a reproduction of a medieval sword in the following sense. We did not use medieval steels or wrought iron in it, so most historical European martial artists practice with modern steel swords that outperform traditional steels. That means their cuts as well as their sparring techniques will be heavily influenced by the maximum performance of the material they have in hand. And it is very likely that the historical origin from which we're basing it on would not have been up to par compared to our modern version.
Yeah, so let's get started. Let's start removing a lot of weight off of all of our guard pieces. And contrary to popular belief, the medieval swords that you guys have known to love and think are indestructible, more often than not, the very fancy ones are actually very delicate in the hilts, small swords, rapiers, and certainly Italian falchions like this. Mm-hmm. So we're going to grind a lot of material off. We might leave a little more than the original just to keep it structurally sound, but in the end, I think we're going to have a pretty awesome piece.
Yeah, swords are very dainty, and this one will be refined, but we will make sure that it's a little bit thicker just in case for the modern user.
Right. All right, let's do it.
All right. A lot of the detail work is accomplished before the rings are attached to the guard. The reason for that being is that the detail work becomes cumbersome once the guard is whole, and it's much easier to manipulate the rings separately. The reason for the detail work is not only aesthetic, but it is also to reduce a lot of weight, because every cut reduces that much more material and therefore makes the guard that much lighter.
Alright, our guard, it's just about ready to have the side rings added. Ilya used a special punch to create the shoulders so the guard fits nice and flush. He then used a torch, heat up the outside portions of our fleur-de-lis, bent those over, and then obviously he used a torch to curve the tines of our guard. So the very last thing we have to do before we add the rings is do any detail work on the center part. Once we have those rings on, we won't be able to get to it. So I'm going to use the narrow wheel, cut in some detail on our center section, and then we'll add the rings.
Perfect. Alright, this should work. Now it's off to Matt to clean up the welds on the inside and polish up the piece.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the guard for our Falchion is that
Skallagrim.
Our Falchion for Skallagrim is just about done. Obviously, we have a little bit of fine tuning to do, some file work, some hand sanding to really finish out the transitions where the welds are. But for the most part, this guard is done, and it is awesome.
All right, let's check it out. Okay, let's not put it on the wrong. That would be embarrassing, but this is not.
Not embarrassing at all. Now, the fittings for this sword, both the guard, the pommel, are darkened on the original, antiqued if you will, because it is antique. So we won't be leaving them bright and shiny. We will be darkening them down.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering whether to try to use an actual old school technique of antiquing something or using a modern way.
You can't pee on it.
I'm not going to pee on it.
All right. Well, I'm pretty happy so far. I'm pretty excited. Tune in next time. We'll get started on the pommel and the actual handle itself. And yeah, as promised, part 5, building the Skallagrim Falchion. It's done.
Stay tuned. Skallagrim.
Falchion.
Skallagrim.
Don't forget to like the video, and as always, we ask you to consider subscribing to That Works.